So today's episode of Ken Reads is talking about a subject that's not regarding any letters. Well, actually, that's not true. It's regarding a subject that has come to our attention involving very, very, very abusive avoidant behavior that can manifest from clinicians in the workplace. So mental health professionals. And truly, this can also manifest in people of powers of employment as well. But we're going to be focusing today's episode on crap, and that word's putting it far too lightly. Really abusive therapists who are grooming their clients using avoidant behavior and very covert abusive tactics. And we want to talk about this because normally in these dynamics where there's a therapist who's engaging in misconduct, it's usually overt and something that will be judged by a panel from an associated body where they'll look for clear signs of boundary violations, abandonment, or things that do direct harm to the client's well-being. And usually those cases are looking for some pretty clear signs that there were boundaries that were violated and that there was coercion, and usually similar to what we would normally see in traditional forms of abusive relationships where they are overt, experience battering. That's the sort of realm we would be engaging in review. However, there is one case, quite similar to avoidant romantic relationships, that tends to get flown under the radar because of how covert and frankly sneaky and deceptive it is. And that is very deceptive, avoidant, abusive relationships from therapists to their clients. So we'll paint an example of this very shortly. And by we, I am joined once again by my amazing teammate, Megan Brito. Megan, would you like to reintroduce yourself for everyone?
Yes. Hi, everybody. As Ken said, my name is Megan Brito. I am a teammate with Ken Reed Counseling. So with Ken, I work as a coach. I provide coaching support for individuals who have recently been broken up with by somebody who had a significant avoidant attachment, or really just severe attachment woundings in general that affected the relationship. I work with individuals that are wanting to heal their own respective attachment styles. And I also help support individuals to put context to their partner. Again, usually, typically, it's an ex-partner that maybe struggled with things like addiction, or we also talk about ways that abuse and violence can show up in these types of relationships. Nobody may have laid a finger on one another, but that doesn't mean that abuse wasn't present. So I work part-time. That's what I do with Ken in a coaching capacity with Ken Reed Counseling. And full-time, I am a registered social worker with the Ontario College of Social Workers and Social Service Workers. And I provide addiction counseling to individuals in my community in rural southwestern Ontario, Canada. I specialize in behavior addictions specifically. So I work within the field of mental health and addictions. I support folks primarily with things like gambling addiction, sex and pornography addictions, shopping, binge eating, hoarding. We call it technology use. So that's like your phone, social media, your tablet, video game use, and a little bit of hoarding. I don't think I've mentioned that one. So shopping and hoarding. That's what I do full time. And for many, many years, I also worked frontline in the sector of domestic violence. So I worked with women and children fleeing domestic and family violence. So that's a lot of experience I bring into the work that I do with Ken as a coach and work in supporting with attachment coaching. So that's a bit about me.
Yeah, and Megan and I wanted to talk about this topic today because we actually had a couple of respective cases come to us recently where, in a nutshell, we were dealing with an individual who had been suffering from a abusive relationship with an avoidant therapist. And as most of you know, when we look at romantic relationships with someone who has a severe avoidant attachment style, we expect the following: a lot of intensity, lovemaking in the beginning, that discerned sign of the avoidant partner pulling back, and then ultimately a sudden ending, a discard, a separation that came out of nowhere, with maybe a bit of boomeranging back and forth afterwards. These cases are the ones we're going to talk about today are different in the context that it has a different dynamic at play. When it's two romantic partners, you know, there for the most part, it seems like you're operating at the same playing field. We know that the avoidant partner is the one that will try and take control of the reins of the relationship in order to satisfy their own needs to feel safe. But when that happens, when the avoidant partner is, say, a boss at a job, or in this case that we're going to talk about, a mental health professional, the dynamic has changed significantly, where there's real power and abuse and coercion that is present that can have a significant impact on, in this case, the client and their well-being. So I'm going to hand this over to Megan. And Megan, I was going to say, do you want to share a fictitious example of what we're talking about?
Yes. So definitely so fictitious. So also I think maybe a little bit of context too. So even for folks who have maybe never sought things like counseling or therapy, whether they're from a counselor, a therapist, a psychologist, or a psychiatrist, it is our job to be friendly. We, I think a good, again, a good clinician, a good mental health professional deeply cares about their clients. We think about you when we're not in session. We think about how you're doing. Things will remind us of our clients. We care about your well-being. We care that you're okay. We are always friendly and present without, we're not here to judge you. We're not here to shame you. We really are here to understand what's going on for you and why, and support you with goals that are important to you. But we are not your friends. We will not ever become your lovers. You will never become like a daughter or a brother or like the mom I didn't have. We will never, ever be those things. So if a fictitious example would be you going in for counseling, for therapy, for supports, and I'll just refer to them as a therapist. So your therapist basically befriends you or has you meet their family and come to your home and that's a boundary violation. That's kind of what we're talking about. This moves away from a therapeutic relationship into either a friend relationship, a like weird adding you to the family kind of relationship, or again, we think about sexual relationships. It's that it moves away from coming in and supporting with your problems into more intimate relationships, whatever they may be. I don't know if that was a bit long-winded, but do you feel like that answered the question, Ken?
Yeah, I do. No, that was fabulous. And I think to just complement what you've shared, I think I'll add a bit of flavor to the fictitious example.
Yeah.
Let's say the client is Greg and he's seeing his therapist, Jono. Greg is coming to Jono to talk about family issues, difficulties, getting on with his parents. And over time, Jono is attuned, witnessing, available, caring, and also is very present for Greg as he's going through this experience. Then, as Greg feels that his time is winding down, Jono is saying things like, "Oh, I see you like a son to me. You're someone that I really relate to in ways that I've never had with any of my family members before." For context, Jono is apparently married and has kids of his own. He has had some, difficulties he's been going through that he's occasionally shared in the conversation, talking every now and then about how, he finds it annoying that he has to constantly be present for his partner and her needs, and also finds it difficult to connect with the kids from time to time. But there's just something so wonderful about the connection he has with Greg that's just, a little bit more down to earth, grounded. I just wish you could be like a son to me. And then as things are coming to an end in their therapeutic relationship, Jono just adds, this doesn't have to be the end. We could potentially be friends off the back of this. How would that be? And Greg's like, feeling a little bit uncertain because on one hand, he's feeling a bit of an alarm bell go off in his system saying that seems a bit strange, but nevertheless, he thinks, oh, I would like that because I don't have many people in my life who are attuned or listening or actually care about me the way that Jono does. It means a lot to have someone like this. So they continue to interact, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. They talk a lot over the phone together. And, over time, Greg's being invited to Jono's home to meet the kids, to meet the family, and even is being involved quite heavily with, you know, some activities that Jono is a part of. And at several points, when Greg is confronting some difficulties at work, Jono is like, well, let me directly confront your manager or your boss. I'll help sort this out for you. And this causes Greg to lose his job because Jono has come in and directly intervened in a way which has been not only unethical, but also causes Jono to overstep some clear boundaries on behalf of Greg and cause him serious issues. But, Greg just waves his hand over it initially. He's shocked and feeling a bit uncertain as to how things were, and he tries confronting Jono about this, only for Jono to scream at him saying, I'm not your friend, and for him to feel very confused about what suddenly changed. And after about a week of silence, he hears from Jono again saying, hey, I've missed you. I really wanted to hear about how you've been. And Greg's naturally confused. He's uncertain as to why this is happening. And after another week of, trying to re-engage, Jono reminds him, I don't care about you, and I've never cared about you because I'm your therapist, and I don't have the capacity to care about you or any of my clients. Greg is confused. He's uncertain as to where he stands in this relationship. And this behavior continues and escalates and gets to the point where eventually Greg says to Jono, I feel like, I'm being gaslit. I feel like there's a lot of hot and cold behavior. And Jono just outright says, if you contact me or my family again, I'm going to call the police. And Greg is naturally feeling devastated, dare I say, even maybe a bit heartbroken. And he feels that he's lost a valuable rock in his life because he didn't have anyone else before that as well, too. And he then tries seeking out the steps to figure out how to proceed off the back of this, to find out how he can try and get some justice for his situation. And he tries to take it up with Jono's associative body to see what he can do to, get some payback in an ethical way for what's happened. But the process is long. The judicial body doesn't really seem all that supportive or wants to have much more clear signs of evidence of harm done by Jono. And if it does go to a case, it doesn't really land very well for this body. Jono's in a bit of a pickle because on one hand, it feels that he lost his best friend, maybe even something a bit more than that. And also at the same time, he's also desperately seeking for support and answers, but feels like no one will be able to understand or relate or even support him in the way that he wants to. This is essentially the scenario that we're talking about. And the fact that two of these cases almost came within like a week of each other to Megan and I, it makes me think this is incredibly common and it goes unsaid in a lot of spaces. So we just thought we'd bring this up.
Yeah, Ken, I really love that example you gave. And again, this is fictitious. Cannot emphasize this enough. I think it's really important for both Ken and I, the situations that have come to each of us regarding um, deeply concerning and unethical and highly inappropriate behaviors from, again, individuals who had interactions with probably incredibly avoidant or fearful avoidant clinicians. That the example that Ken gave really is fictitious, doesn't have any similarities to what we dealt with. And speaking of, ethical and appropriate disclosures, we are not going to give any details regarding what happened between, again, folks that we both supported, who had incredibly abusive and ethically inappropriate clinicians service them. So I also hope that for folks listening, maybe we'll walk away with things to keep an eye out for if you seek support from clinicians, or even in this capacity, we talk about, coaches that are offering or clinicians that are offering coaching space, just like things to also keep an eye out for and that are not okay. And really emphasizing that even though someone may not have had a sexual or romantic relationship with you, like the clinician, doesn't mean that it's okay. I think that's hopefully what folks can take away with. Even if you end up working with the clinician, no romantic relationship, no sexual relationship, it still can be inappropriate, unethical, abusive, and abusing that power dynamic and that therapeutic rapport that your clinician is supposed to build with you. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And it's normal within reason for clinicians to have lapses. Like we're not perfect. Like, and by a lapse, I mean like we might allow a moment of, say, disclosure to linger on a little bit too long. We might have a moment where a part of us wants to rescue a client and tell them, don't go back to your ex. I mean, I've certainly had moments of that in the past as well, too. Or we want to just be like, why would you allow this to happen to yourself? Because we care about our clients within reason. And like that happens. And as long as you own it, and you're I mean, I've had moments where I've been deeply triggered in session and I've confronted my client saying, just to let you know, this is really confronting for me. And if I end up feeling like this is going to get in the way of my ability to remain objective and supportive, I will let you know because I'm later to bring this up with my supervisor and possibly even my therapist as well to work through. But it's when, we have these dynamics where a therapist who's got unresolved stuff is enacting trauma upon a client in one of the most holiest of holy places for healing, that we've got serious problems.
Yeah, and I love how you said that. So I think also traditionally when people go seek out again the clinical supports, not so much coaching, but the like clinical supports. So that's your therapy, your counseling, your psychiatry, your psychology. Um, Oftentimes we refer to as being blank slates. We're supposed to be as neutral as possible. You do not give any disclosure about yourself. You really are there to just, right? And this is that power dynamic where we kind of maybe cheeky saying, but I'm supposed to know everything about you and you're not supposed to know anything about me. And I've noticed there's been a little bit of a shift away from that blank slate model. And now, again, clinicians are being a little bit more open, a little bit more self-disclosure about themselves, but it's also where it's relevant. I've definitely had, think about, again, at my full-time job, lots and lots of counseling and therapy sessions where I don't disclose things like my sexual orientation or, things about what I do over the weekend or why I had to suddenly take the day off because I was sick or had a medical appointment if it's not relevant or if it's not going to be beneficial to the client. So I think something that I've noticed with, again, those clinicians that are really avoidant, that's not there. When they start to move into that space of, again, crossing that boundary of a therapeutic rapport where they are supposed to be there to help you work through your stuff, reach your goals, unpack trauma, whatever like the goals are. And then they move into, again, let's be friends afterwards. Or, you can come by my house and pick up that one thing. Or, yeah, I do have, you know, I have some old shirts and pants that don't fit. You can have those. Or, yeah, I definitely would be okay if I bumped into you for coffee outside of work. Like that stuff is so inappropriate. Oh, I'm sorry. I feel like I kind of slightly lost my train of thought when we were, kind of where my thoughts were going with this, but it goes back. It's kind of this idea of it's okay to have appropriate, a little bit of self-disclosure where it's relevant in your healing. But if your therapist or counselor or psychiatrist or psychologist really starts leaning into, again, like, let's hang out outside of work, or it's this self-disclosure that's not relevant or not helpful, that's when I start to get worried. And I could see that again when the therapist or that clinician is severely avoidant and that's what they do, that's when I get worried. I don't know if that makes sense or that was a bit of a ramble, but what are your thoughts, Ken, with that?
No, I completely agree. I mean, particularly if, for example, like the way I conduct sessions is I admit I can be friendly, I can be reasonable. I try and be as, humane as possible. I'm not a blank slate therapist by any stretch of the imagination. Like, I mean, not that I'm a therapist, but, I will
Mhm.
react to what clients say because I'm like, fuck me, like that's pretty shit with whatever happened within reason, of course.
Yeah,
Um, I laugh when it's funny. I don't when it's not. It's one of those things where
yeah.
it really does. I try and find that healthy middle ground of interaction and humane expression where possible, whilst also facilitating a safe container for clients and to be a mirror. But I think when we're talking about, say, the therapeutic relationship and how it relates to these severe avoidant cases, it's more to understand we as clinicians are indeed supposed to facilitate a secure, professional relationship for the client. We are probably the first for many who've never experienced what security feels like. And I've got to be honest, like I know for me, when I first saw my therapist and they were so attuned and listening to me, I thought my therapist was hitting on me because I was like, what? Like, this is unusual. Like, this is nice. Like, give me more of this. This is awesome. Because validation was what my system was yearning for, and I hadn't had that at the time. So it's like, oh, yes, attractive therapist who's giving me all of this validation. Yum, yum. Yes, please. But really, it's there to say that, it's one of those things where we are very, very vulnerable to, you know, any form of validation and attunement when we haven't had it. So, and I've had clients who've said to me, Ken, by someone, when we started, who actually said to me, oh, I'm just wondering, are there feelings between us? And I had to be very blunt and say, no, there isn't. But I can understand how that arose because, again, it's one of those things where people who aren't used to that level of vulnerability, care, safety, and stability might confuse it for romantic affection, control, love, a whole range of different things. So that is to be expected. And it's great if a client or the clinician is able to bring it up. And I mean, I've certainly had situations where, I have felt like a line has been crossed and I'll be the first person to be like, hey, I need to let you know something because this is really going to affect our ethical relationship. We need to take this very seriously and discuss it because this is important. Mind you, again, similar to the first example, it was happened once in my learning many, many, many moons ago. That is to be expected. I think that is just one of those things where as we evolve in this space, we will have those moments of figuring out where our boundaries are and where they are not. So there is that. However, there is a big difference between that and somebody who is trying to control the dynamic like an avoidant attacher might in dating, where there is that it's almost like the dial has been switched up a little too much and things are feeling way too laced with a bit of intimacy to the point where it's not that professional intimacy, it's romantic. And it's just things like, oh, I really care about you. I'm really worried about your well-being. Not, hey, listen, a part of me worries about you, but I trust that you'll be fine. It's, I'm really worried about you and I want to protect you from anything happening to you. And they start to really try and up the ante. They may even, if it's in a physical room, they might even sit with you on the same couch together. For me, that like, even as a clinician, that is a huge no. I'm like, I don't want to be anywhere near you physically. Like, I'm like, I would rather have as many miles between us as possible to facilitate this. But, when a clinician sort of breaches that boundary that's between them and the client in that particular way, that just sets red flags and alarm bells in my head because I'm like, oh, no thanks. Or if they want to hug you or they want to like fist bump you or handshake you, I'm like, please don't. Like that's where I'm like, get away from me like at all costs. So, it's those little small subtle things that can often be the the things that then build up over time. And you're like, oh my God, I have this special relationship with my therapist. I feel like this is so, different from anything I've ever had before. I feel like I'm treated so well. Yeah, you are being treated so well, but it's also probably a trauma bond.
Yeah, and I also want to touch on that a little bit more too. So something that I wish that there was some type of psychological exam that every single person who goes into the helping profession or coaching, because like technically coaching is unregulated, but something where we had to take like a psychological exam to say, are we appropriate for services, or figuring out a way to explore what is your attachment style, and is it severe enough that it's impacting you again in these therapeutic relationships where we have the bigger power dynamic for like with our clients. um because this is where really insidious behavior can interject itself into, again, into this field. People that should not be working, people that are severely wounded and who are acting out on their wounds, are interjecting themselves as, again, into this space. They're becoming therapists and counselors and psychologists, and that's the stuff that goes unchecked, because we learn what are all the modalities. We do learn how do we interact with people. So we talk about, how do we sit, how do we mirror people's body language, how do we validate, how do we paraphrase what you're talking about, we're called active listening skills, excuse me. So there's a textbook of how we have to learn. But, again, if you have severe attachment woundings that are affecting how you show up in the working environment with us when we are at our most vulnerable moments, that's not something you can learn in a textbook. That is something that maybe you can mask or try to hide for a period of time. But if you are so severely wounded in your attachment, um, that's eventually going to creep in. And this is where I see that insidious behavior. That's why I wish we had some type of, I almost want to call it a psychological assessment to really weed out people, because I'm so fortunate. And I still regularly access therapy. I've never had that experience with a clinician, but I've absolutely met people at like that work in this field. I have interacted with people, or when I was in school going into social work, I have met people and I think to myself, no goddamn way you should be in this field. What are you doing here? I've almost reported people, but two of them were actual narcissists, and the damage, I was going to be destroyed if I did. So that fear they can also put into place. It's crazy. So I think the thing that's so hard that, again, I struggle with is seeing it, and reporting where I can. I've had to do that as well. But also, again, we can't see it, and it's out there more than I'd like to acknowledge, that there are so many wounded people helping us at our most vulnerable that then continue to abuse us. I think it was Gabor Mate in one of his books. I can't remember which one. Again, it's not actual, it's not like a studied scientific research information, but it's something that he came up with. And I think that it's fairly accurate, where Gabor Mate talks about 4 different types of people that go into the helping profession. So the first one, again, they're not in order, but the first one is essentially people who have gone through shit, got their shit figured out, and are now giving back. I think a lot of folks in the helping profession fall under this. So they struggled, had to get help, and now they are getting back. The second one, I'm going to call them unicorns. Very, 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 very small percentage of the population really hasn't experienced significant trauma or attachment woundings, but they just really, really like helping people. Not very common. That's why I call them unicorns. I haven't met one yet, but apparently they exist. That's a second reason. And then the next 2 are pretty insidious. So the next one, I'm going to call it the blind leading the blind. These are the individuals that are severely wounded, have not worked on their stuff, and have chosen to go into the helping profession or even coaching. I'm going to say, right, depending on what the coaching services are, if it's coaching around, mental health or attachment woundings or whatnot, these are people that have not worked on their shit. And they are thinking, well, if I do this, I'm a good person, everything's fine. And I don't have to reflect on my poor behavior and make any changes because I help people. So it's kind of like the blind leading the blind, the wounded leading the wounded. And the fourth one, which I've also, again, I worked with a couple that was literally traumatizing in so many ways. And I had to do a lot of work to heal from that, are people that go into this line of work to exert power over other people, abuse other people, and very deliberately do it. So these are the sociopaths, narcissists, psychopaths, and really do it to exert and abuse power. So um, I see it, it's out there, and I wish there was a way to test it. So yeah, it's out there. And again, Ken and I have seen it. I was able to help encourage somebody to report the abuse that that the clinician they were seeing did. Like it's awful. So anyway, that's my ramble, but
Yeah, but I think you've really touched on some really important points, particularly pertaining to the reasons as to why people get into this profession. And I think that
Mhm.
a lot of those reasons can actually blend with one another as well too. The blind leading the blind can also be coercive controllers as well too. And
Yep.
the unicorns might also be people who might have experienced one bit of a major adversity that then leads them to then want to go into this field too. But regardless of the origin story, the fact remains, which is this is not about giving people hypervigilance, being like, now you got to watch out for avoidance in the therapeutic space. It's more just to say this is actually more of a I guess, a spotlight on what can happen and to gently say to people who might have gone through this that you are not alone, that this particular example does unfortunately happen more often than we would like to believe, and that it is okay. And if we don't hear from any of you, that's totally fine. It's more just to say that be mindful that this is a thing. Those of you that have been through it or want support from this, Megan, who is a coach, can obviously support within reason over these particular cases too. Obviously, depending on where you're at and where you're from, we may or may not be able to support you in every step of the way, but we can obviously at the very least receive and hear a bit about what's going on and then give an idea as to like the direction that we can participate in to support you, because I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver, because naturally, depending on where you are, we may not be able to do much at all, because here in Australia, this counseling business is able to work with people overseas, but that doesn't mean that our power extends over the jurisdictions of certain parts of the world. So all we can really do at the very least is just listen to what you've been through and then go from there. But regardless, like I said, this is more of a visibility episode, just saying, be mindful, this happens. A lot of you probably been through it. I have certainly been through some pretty egregious behavior from clinicians in the past as well, too. Some that are amazing. But I think it's one of those things like everything, which is we've all got our stuff and we just need to work on managing it and working through it in order to be better at this particular role. That's to be expected. But and whilst we can't accept perfection from all of our clinicians, it is one of those things where when we're talking about these people who are highly avoidant and highly coercive, that it can become an invisible statistic where many people are abused and are very, very frightened and unable to access appropriate support for what they've been through.
Yeah, Ken, I think you spoke to that really, really well. As you said, this is a spotlight podcast, and um, it's coercive. It's covert. Again, people don't maybe recognize that we usually say this friendships, forming a friendship with with the clinician during or shortly after you're done services really isn't okay. And again, Ken, I'm not speaking for you, but I know I've had experiences both in the clinical work and in coaching where I think to myself, I really wish I met you outside of this space
Yeah.
because something, right? Because something we recognize is that this is a field we chose to go into, right? Nobody forced us into it. And one of the boundaries we have to keep is that we are friendly, we care about our clients, we think about them, when we're not working with them, but we can never be friends. We can never date. You can never join the family unless you like marry a cousin or something. That's a different story. But like, you know what I mean? Like we can't have you in our lives in a different way. So if, whenever I hear clinicians form friendships with their clients during or even after, that to me is such a red flag. I see that as a huge boundary violation because that's something we have to accept that we shouldn't be doing that with people that we work with. So, and we see it so much with avoidant individuals because I also think too, again, both clinicians that are severely avoidant who have not worked on their stuff and are practicing in the mental health profession, they can go ahead and do that hot and cold behavior, kind of, again, lure you in and pull out. And they go, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm your therapist, or I'm your counselor, or I'm your psychologist. I wouldn't do anything like that. And they can also not take ownership for their behavior and put it back on you. And it can maybe feel safer because you two weren't dating. That dynamic is different. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Ken, but
No, I completely agree. I mean, it's actually not too dissimilar from when you've got an avoidant who's engaging in an affair, meaning that, it's very easy for them to rationalize, well, we were never dating. Like, I've already got a partner. You're the crazy one who's trying to come on to me. Like, it's very easy for them to fall back on their profession, their marriage, whatever it may be, to justify their stance because their denial game is often so strong. So I'm going to round out here by just saying, I am sorry to anyone who's gone through an experience like this because truly, truly, it's bad enough to experience the avoidant discard, but I think there's something uniquely oppressive, invasive, and also just so, treacherous about these dynamics where you've got an abusive, avoidant clinician with a client. And just as a disclaimer, as always, not all avoidant leaning people in clinician roles act like this. There are some incredibly avoidant leaning clinicians out there who do fabulous jobs with clients. But those that do not, just as those who probably have a severe anxious attachment style who go into this space, can do a lot of harm to their clients. So yeah, that's everything I wanted to say. Megan, was there anything you wanted to finish off with?
um no, I mean, really just again, if you ever see somebody and they're supposed to be helping you in vulnerable times and packing stuff, like they're there for support and they offer friendship, they say, I love you like a sister, or let's be friends. Run, don't walk. I want you to run out of that office so fast that you leave smoke trails, like you leave burn marks in the floor. And I don't ever want you to go back. And I want you to tell people this is what happened with my therapist or this counselor I met or whoever. Don't do it. And the reason why I kind of paused at coaching, and I don't think this is going to contradict anything. Coaching is right, it's not regulated, it's a little bit different. And the thing that's kind of different between coaching versus like counseling therapy is that we're here to talk about like this is our life experience and this is how it can translate into you, and we can be a little bit more open and transparent. That's also why decent clinicians can go into coaching because we can be a little bit more transparent or a little bit more engaging or a little bit more personal. But again, we're still not your friends. We're not going to be having relationships with you in other capacities. We're still here to offer a friendly, supportive service, but maybe we can talk a little bit more about our life with you. So if you see a therapist or a clinician that behaves that way, run. Or if you work with a coach where you feel like it's moving into friendship territory, also run. because there's a fine line between talking about life experiences from the coach, what worked for that coach, what didn't work, versus telling his life stories, becoming friends. That's when stuff gets weird and it's inappropriate. So again, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that, Ken, but
No, I definitely say, look, I will say, last thing I'll say is it can be a tough fine line to balance between wanting to be friendly and be friends with your clients as well too. I even said to one of my clients today as part of my group container, I was like, listen, I just want to let you know your contribution has been amazing. In another life, I wish we could be friends, but we cannot because I'm your coach. So I just want to say, from a distance perspective, I really appreciate what you brought to the table. And that is that. Because, I can still have feelings of positivity that go beyond, the coaching, counseling relationship where I'm like, yeah, I really like this person. Like they're fun to work with. Like, that's perfectly normal and human, but it's also about acknowledging when that can go too far because it's very easy for us to just get a little enthusiastic and think, oh my God, we can talk about each other's life stories. No, I'm here to listen to another person's life story, and that's it. So, and look, I think it is one of those things where it's really important to still maintain those very responsible ethics. You know, if sessions go over time, I need to be paid. I will also ask to be paid for those things. It's also about not making sure that's a regular occurrence. It's respecting time and boundaries, the container. It all goes back to we're not here to make exceptions. We're here to do a job. And at times, that job may include positive regard that feels friendly, but that's it.
yes, I think that was said very well. So I feel like I don't have too much else to add to this, but I do hope that folks found benefit to it. I actually also maybe want to emphasize we're not here to like our sole role again with Ken Reed Counseling. We're not here to have you come and like, can you help me report this person? Because again, if it's out of jurisdiction, there's many other factors with it. But if you are concerned and just again need to talk about it and we can validate this experience and maybe help guide you, yes, within reason, but we're not here to have people start flooding the inbox of like, can you help me report this particular person I've worked with? That we won't quite have capacity. But yeah, and like I said, if you start feeling like this is too close of a relationship with this person who's supposed to be supporting me, run, get out. It's not going to get any better. It won't. It
No,
will get worse.
no.
So yeah.
And whilst that transference of stuff is a possibility, it can happen. It's better to address the elephant in the room. Like Megan is saying, if it crosses a line, and believe me, a lot of you will know when that line is crossed, look for the exit. Anyways,
Yeah.
thank you everyone for participating and listening into this, understandably quite confrontational episode because it is, insidious, disturbing, and also very, it is similar yet very different to what we normally talk about. And yeah, I mean, if anyone wants to write their letters of this experience, they're more than welcome to because, hey, it's still an avoidant experience. We can whip out the avoidant bingo cards for it as well too because it's still up there. And we will be back again for another letter reading very